rust, insurance, price, parts. There's a lot of questions around imports, and as someone who imported his own Hiace and has lived in it now for almost a year, I thought I'd give my learnings and experiences around that. And to be specific, I'm talking about importing a Hiace from Japan to Australia. To give you the TLDR straight up front, I would not purchase an import unless I really wanted the all-wheel drive capabilities of the import, I really wanted the shapes that the imports come in, or I really wanted to take advantage of the pricing as they're sometimes cheaper than Australian vans. I also would not purchase from a dealer, that is, I would import it myself unless I really needed the van quickly, like ASAP in the next week or so, or I really wanted to be able to inspect the van myself personally before buying the van. So let's get into all the details now. If you're looking at getting an imported Hiace, what possible benefit could they provide over, say, an Australian Hiace? The number one benefit is that they come in a full-time four-wheel drive variant. This is often called all-wheel drive. The manufacturer classifies it as a full-time four-wheel drive, probably closer to an all-wheel drive than a proper 4x4 vehicle, but we don't have to be pedantic about that right now. The Hiace coming in a full-time four-wheel drive is the main advantage to me because in the Australian market, the only other competitors you have is basically the Volkswagen, which come in their motion technology, and then you have vans which have been converted into proper 4x4s, but they're often a bit more expensive, and then you might have another truck option, and that's pretty much it, unfortunately. So if you really want a van that's just a little bit more capable off-road, or even one that's just not going to get bogged in wet grass, then this is a huge advantage to have. The number two reason is the shape. If you really like the flat fronted Hiace, because they're way easier to park, and they also give you more room in the rear for less overall space because you don't have that engine bump at the front, then the Japanese Hiaces are good because the new models still have the 200 series body, whereas in Australia we've moved to the 300 series body. They also come in a lot more shape configurations. So in Australia we only do the long wheelbase and super long wheelbase. In Japan they also do a mid-roof, they do a wider version, they do a long wheelbase with a high top. There's a lot of other configurations that you can get it in. Number three is the price. Because of the price of the yen, you can get these way cheaper even after you factor in the cost of shipping, decontamination, GST, and all those sorts of things. For the price of a second-hand two-wheel drive Hiace in Australia, you can get a brand new four-wheel drive Hiace from Japan. Now, unfortunately, with the yen carry trade that's unwinding, they're not going to be as cheap as they were before, and it's obviously dependent on the price of the yen, but even so, they're still cheaper than the Aussie ones. And that's it really. I can't see any other benefit of getting a Japanese import. It's the price, it's the shape, and it's the full-time four-wheel drive capability. If you've decided you do still want one, let's talk through all the concerns and downsides. Number one is a risk of something major going wrong. In Australia, if you buy a new car and something major goes wrong, then you're covered under warranty. You can take it back to the local dealership and they're going to fix it up for you. If you buy a brand new Japanese import, you bring it over here and there's a major fault, well, beyond having to ship it back to Japan, there's not really much you can do. Even if you have it for like 3 years and there's a major recall on the part, the best you can do is probably purchase that part from overseas, have it shipped in, and then fix it yourself. So this is the main risk, that something catastrophic or something really bad goes wrong with it. You're not going to be covered under any kind of warranty. That said, Toyotas are pretty damn reliable and it's pretty rare that something like this is going to happen. The other downside is naturally it's tailored to the Japanese market. So the head unit is in Japanese, which isn't a big issue for me. I just connect my Bluetooth to it. The dash is also in Japanese, but it tells me the things that are really important like speed and kilometers and stuff in English, so that's still manageable. It doesn't come with cruise control. That has to be my biggest pet peeve, but again, you can get a third-party cruise control installed. There's just all these small differences. And that said, I know we're talking about downsides here, but there are some pros as well. Like having the parallel parking mirror, that's super handy. I wish the Aussie Hiaces had this. There's a rear heater in the back, so if you're in a colder climate in Australia, Tasmania, going down to the snow, you can keep that in and that'll be super helpful. So it's just these little pros and cons of the way that they do things differently. The other downside is insurance, and this is a question I see a lot. In my opinion, it is harder to get insurance for Japanese imports, full stop, because there just aren't as many providers to choose from. There are only a select few who will insure imported Hiaces. That said, once you do find those select few, it's usually alright. The hassle comes in finding that one that will actually insure you. With me, it took me about 2 days to find one that could insure me. I rang up one insurer. They said that they would insure me, but I'd have to put like a bed and a stove in the back. So I spent a day meeting their requirement, putting that all in, rang them back up, and then they told me they wouldn't insure me at all, and they referred me to this website which has a list of insurers who do grey imports. So I called up NRMA, which was was on that list, but then after talking with them, they said they would insure it, but not for the price that it was worth. So if my van's worth $70,000, they're like, we won't insure it for any more than $40,000. I rang another company. They said they did grey imports, but only caravans. Eventually, I got in touch with Sharon's, and they were the one I went with, but you can see it is a bit of an effort to get them insured. Once it's insured, it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about it, but getting it insured can be an effort. And I say this also because I've seen online, even after registering mine with Shannon's, that many people can't get their grey import insured with Shannon's because they weren't considered an enthusiast. So it seems very variable depending on maybe the person that you get on the day. Parts is the other one, and it's sort of the same as insurance. Not impossible, just a bit more of a hassle, as you might have to order parts from Japan and then wait for them to get shipped over. And some mechanics don't know how to work on them properly, which is maybe a good thing because you weed out all the bad mechanics. But as I said, it's not a big deal, it's just a bit more of a hassle. Rust, this is a major one, particularly with the four-wheel drive variants in Japan, particularly coming from certain regions. And this is because the people who buy the four-wheel drives are people in snowy areas, and often in those areas they'll salt the road and do things that just lead to a bit more corrosion. So if you're looking to buy a brand new one, then this probably isn't really an issue you need to worry about, but just make sure your agent doesn't leave the van sitting at the dock for like 3 months, because that's why you see even with new Australian cars, they'll have corrosion on the underbody because they're left sitting by a dock near the ocean to corrode and rust. So have it sitting somewhere away from the dock until the last minute when it's ready to be shipped. If you're buying an older van, there's certainly hotspots and areas which they recommend you don't buy from. That said, I'm not sure how this works out because I'm sure they're aware that people are starting to not buy from those areas, so they could just drive the van to another area or another auction house and sell it. So I'm not really sure about this one, but I can only tell you what I've been told by importers as for areas to avoid. Naturally, the older the car, the more chance for rust as well. And that's where making sure whoever is inspecting it in Japan is inspecting it properly for rust. And if you're purchasing one here in Australia, make sure you or somebody you trust inspects it for rust and checks all of the rust hotspots that people often forget to check. Some of the vans, they spray the underbody of the car in order to help prevent rust, but you have to be careful with this as well because sometimes they spray it in order to mask rust that is there. So just look at the job. Does it look like they've taken off the parts and sprayed the parts individually, or does it look like they've just sprayed over the whole van and there's overspray and it's missing parts? And so just inspect it properly and be aware that it could be used either for protective purposes or in order to mask rust. If you see like bubbling coming out of that paint, then obviously there's rust underneath it, so just keep an eye out for that. Lastly, there's the vehicle history. In Australia, generally you get a better idea of the vehicle history. People will have filled out logbooks and such. In Japan, it can be good, but if you're importing it, you generally don't get as good of an idea of the vehicle history, which is why if you're purchasing a van over 1-2 years old, I would definitely have a vehicle history report run on it. They're not that expensive. If you're purchasing one in Australia and it was purchased from an auction, you'll definitely want to get that auction sheet, and you'll definitely want an export certificate, whether you're importing it yourself or buying it from a dealer. So that's a bit of an overview of considerations for an imported van. Now you need to decide whether you want to buy one from a dealer that's already here or whether you want to import yourself. Let's talk about dealers first. My opinion is you should straight up avoid them at all costs if you can. When I was looking at getting an import, this was initially the way I wanted to go about it. I was going to go through a dealer, inspect it myself and purchase it. But without going through the experience I had with dealing through every single dealer, the long story short is I came to the opinion that this is the worst way to do it and that you should always import yourself if you can. There are really only 2.5 benefits to buying from a dealer that I can see. The first benefit is that you can inspect the van yourself in person. So if you're importing yourself and you're buying from an auction, which is pretty much the most popular way that people do it, all you have to go on is the auction sheet, and then you have whoever is inspecting it for you in Japan. So if the auction sheet missed something and the person inspecting it missed something, then you may be buying a van that you won't realize has a problem until it arrives here. As I said before though, if you're buying new, that's not really an issue. Whereas if you go to a dealer and you're buying a secondhand car, then it's right in front of you and you can do a full inspection over it to exactly your liking and see everything about it. Time is the other benefit of buying from a dealer. Like if you've left it to the last minute, you need the van today, even in the next month, then you have no choice because it's it's going to take you at least 4-ish weeks for it to ship over, and then compliance and all that sort of stuff. So if you need one ASAP, you suck it up and you go to a dealer and you buy it with the markup of price that they put on it. The last one is warranty. This is like a 0.5 because I don't really consider it much of a benefit. When you buy from a dealer, they're obliged to give you a 3-month warranty under the Australian consumer law. Don't be fooled, that is a standard warranty that they all have to use, and it only covers certain major malfunctions. Some of the dealers, however, do provide a much longer warranty, like 3 or 5 year, and that's usually the ones that have mechanics on site, often the ones who are registered automotive workshops. And if it's not someone who has a mechanic on site, then often they'll offsource that insurance to the registered automotive workshop that they used to get the vehicle complied. So do just check the fine print on any warranty and see exactly what it covers. But look, Hiaces are built really tough, and even the ones that aren't treated very well can still get away with not too many issues. And I want to touch on just a few of my adventures that I've had dealing with dealers and why I was put off by them. So this was the list I kept of the dealers I dealt with, and it's not like they were all assholes. It's just that some of them didn't do business well, or they didn't have a clue what they were talking about. So I blurred all the names here, even from the ones that I would say to never go with. There's some sort of common issues amongst all of them. Issue number one is most of them have no idea what they're talking about. I don't expect you to know the ins and outs of every car you have. That's not really feasible. But they would post an ad of a van that would say dual airbags. And then I'd just glance at like the pixelated photo that they've uploaded and see that it's clearly not dual airbags. Let me tell you how easy it is to figure out if a car has airbags or not. They have a sign that says SRS airbag. So if there is SRS airbag on the steering wheel, you have an airbag. If there is SRS on the passenger, you have dual airbags. Like, you don't need to be a car guru to figure this out. You don't need to be some sort of genius. And so that was from this company. But now, for instance, this other company, I went to them, I told them what I wanted. I said, look, I'm ready to purchase. I want a van. So they said they'll call me as soon as it arrives, and they didn't. I then went back there to have a look at another car that they had advertised as dual airbags, and of course it didn't have dual airbag. Then they had another van which they said was coming up, and they wanted me to put a deposit down on it so I could secure it. So I'm all ready to put this deposit down, but then I noticed the model code for the van is the same model code as a 2-wheel drive. So I call them up. I'm like, is this definitely a 4-wheel drive? They're like, yeah, it's definitely a 4-wheel drive. And it turned out it wasn't. And so I'm like, do I have to put this deposit down? Can you just not hold it for me and call me when it gets here? Because I'm a little unsure if this is actually a 2-wheel drive or a 4-wheel drive. And then they never got back to me. Then I had a third company, and I'm mentioning this specific issue because it's such an easy thing to spot that they all missed. So this other company, again, lovely to deal with and super professional. I went and visited them. I took one of the vans that they had for a test drive, and I was talking to them. I told them what I was looking for. Later on, they ring me and they say, we have 3 vans that are about to go on sale that match what I want. And that was all-wheel drive, dual airbags. And at the time, you should know this was a really rare combo, which is why I was struggling to find vans that fitted that need. So I said to them, are you sure? Is it definitely dual airbag and all-wheel drive? Because that's a really rare combo, and you're saying all 3 vans have that. And he was like, yep, not 100% sure. Would you like to check them out? I'm like, of course, because they didn't have them advertised, so I couldn't check the photos like I usually do. So I trust them. I drive out there, and it's an hour drive for me. The guy shows me the first car, and I only need to glance at it. I'm like, that's not an all-wheel drive. And then I walk around to the passenger window, and I'm like, and it doesn't have dual airbag. And this is where it got really frustrating, and be like, yeah, no, it's definitely dual airbags. And he's like, we're not even allowed to import them unless they have dual airbags. So I open up the door, and I open up the passenger console, and I'm like, that's where the airbag should be, and there's nothing in there. I went to the other 2 vans, none of them had it either. But I let that go, and I look underneath the van to double check that it's all-wheel drive, because he's telling me it is definitely all-wheel drive. And I go, nope, it's not all-wheel drive. Same shtick, he's like, oh, it's definitely all-wheel drive. And thankfully, by this point, I really knew what I was talking about, so I was able to hold up an argument against him and say, no, you're actually wrong. Otherwise, if you didn't know what you're talking about, you would have just had to believe him because he was so confident in that they were all-wheel drive and dual airbags. To save you the long story short, I said, can you please go and get somebody else that knows what they're talking about? He did. It turned out all 3 vans were 2-wheel drive, single airbag. So I drove all the way out there only to be gaslit by this dude, and in the end he's like, oh yeah, sorry, my bad. But not like, oh, we are really sorry, to make it up, I'll give you a 5% discount or something. It's just like, oh, whoops, soz bro, my bad. And the reason I tell you these stories isn't so I can rant, even though I do quite enjoy that, but because you need to realize these dealers who are selling you the cars could barely tell if they are white or red. Like, they don't give a crap about the car. They don't give a crap about being accurate. They just want to sell this thing. And they will lie to your face confidently, whether intentional or not, and post false ads and all sorts of wrong information. So it's not going to take you much research to be a lot more educated than them. Just by watching this video, now you know how to spot if a car has an airbag or not. I'll give you another story, not from me, but from a mechanic, and he bought it from this particular dealer, and the dealer told him that it had been fully serviced. I don't know if the dealer knew he was a mechanic, so he went and checked it out and was like, dude, you're lying, this clearly hasn't been serviced at all. And so dude was like, oh yeah, all right. And remember, you're covered by the Australian consumer law. So let's say that you did buy a van that was advertised as a 4-wheel drive and you later find out it's a 2-wheel drive. Well, you can take that back because that's false advertising. So again, the beauty of buying in Australia, but you got to be wary that you're buying from all these scumbag dealers. And that's sort of this second generalized issue of buying from a dealership. There's just this really scummy behavior. The advertising was so annoying for me to deal with because dealers would never keep their ads up to date, or they would keep an ad up that's already been sold, or they would post a new ad of a van that's already had a deposit taken, so you'd see it pop up, oh great, and then it says deposit taken. It just became really frustrating. This importer, and again I'll reiterate, this one was lovely to deal with, but I went and visited them. They wrote down exactly what I wanted. They said they would call me back. They never called me back. No biggie, I understand people get busy, I'm not going to hold that against them. I checked their website, another van had come up, it was what I wanted, it was marked as available. I called them, no one picked up, so I was like, alright, stuff it, I'm going to drive down there and view it. Again, this one was like an hour-ish away from me as well. I went down there and they sold it days ago, but they didn't update their site. I figured my bad, should have kept calling them till I got in. Fast forward, a new van was advertised. I ring them this time that afternoon until they pick up. They say they do have it in stock. I say, sweet. I drive down the next day, they said it was sold and they didn't update it on their website either. So again, they were polite, but like so busy it felt like they didn't even want my business. So I just gave up on that particular dealer at that point. This particular dealer, again, I'm very wary of this one. This is the same one that lied about the service being done. He keeps all his ads up. So I used to have a Gumtree alert set up and you would see his ad pop up all the time, but you click them and then it would be like sold or deposit taken. It was just really frustrating for someone that was looking for vans having these constantly pop up that were already sold. And he shills his vans all over Facebook groups, and at one point he tried to shill his van on a post that I made. So I confronted him about a few things and he was such an asshole about it. It turns out I looked into him a little bit. I'm not the first to experience this. I just don't understand why he would act like an asshole as a business online. The second time I dealt with him, I was asking a question in a group about vehicle codes, and again just randomly starts throwing his ads in saying buy my van, it's better, whatever. I'm like, dude, I don't want your van, just answer the question or don't comment. And he rambled on, and eventually I sort of got him to admit that he puts at least a $10,000 markup on the prices of his vans, and he just comes across not right to me. And as I said, did a bit of looking, heard some bad stories from him. I won't name him, but I wouldn't touch this one with a 10-foot pole. What you need to be aware of with these Facebook groups is they're often run by friends of a dealer. So for instance, in one particular group, this dealer is the only person who is allowed to advertise in that group. And what I also found was people who said bad things about that dealer from bad experiences they had were then kicked out of the group. So just be wary that you're seeing a very one-sided story on a lot of these groups. Even if you see a dealer advertise and you get 3 comments being like, oh, they were so great, it's probably the same people commenting all the time, and you don't get to see the other side of it because the people who say negative things get kicked out of the group. So I'm not trying to rant too long. I purposefully picked stories that I think will actually be helpful and relevant to you when you're looking. The last issue with dealers is the pricing. You are paying a substantial markup. So if they import it for $20,000, they might sell it for 30. 10K seems to be a sort of standard markup. I'd say anywhere between 5 to 30. It really depends on the van, the condition it was in the first place, and what they got it for. To give you another story, there's a particular dealer that I went to a few times. One time I saw a van there that had a big dent along the side of it. So this is what you would call an R-grade van if it was purchased at an auction. Some of the dealers don't always purchase from auctions. They have some sort of connection there. But fast forward about a month, I'm back there looking again, and I see the exact same van that had been all patched up, cleaned and fixed. And in the video, it was advertised as, oh, this is a pristine van. Looks like it's been owned by an elderly gentleman who's taking care of it. So it gives you an idea of the deceptive kind of marketing of the history of these vans that some of these dealers are doing. And it was up for a decent price too. So because I can only assume it was purchased quite cheap, there would be a large gap in the markup. I did actually follow another one of the vans from this dealer, and I managed to see the price history because some auction sites let you see the price history. I took that price history, added on all the additional prices, and there was about a 20k difference between that and what he had put it up for. There's a reason that car dealers, just like real estate agents, have a really bad, scummy reputation, and nothing has changed. It's just they've mixed up their tactics. The last thing to note is that some of these dealers are now offering importing as well. Me personally, I would avoid that. I would just stick to someone who does purely importing and at worst sells a few of those cars on the side. You don't want someone who is primarily a dealer that also does importing. So let's talk about the other option, which is importing one yourself, either fully or more likely through someone who does importing. The benefit of this is obviously that you save a bunch of money, and the way you can work that out is there's a bunch of fixed costs that don't really change. Things like shipping, decontamination, freight on board, stuff like that. These are all pretty static costs. So you get those static costs, then you have the sale of your van. So if you know what van you want to buy, you look at the auction history of similar vans, then you can get a rough estimate of how much you're going to pay for that van, input that into the equation, and then you add on the GST. That gives you a rough total of how much you're going to pay. Then of course on this side you have compliance, and you also have Service New South Wales and such that you have to deal with, and then you add those all together, and then that's going to give you a rough estimate of how much you're going to pay for the van. And if you've already found an importer, they'll be able to do all that for you and give you a rough estimate as to how much it's going to cost. Then you can compare that to the vans that are here at dealerships and see how much you're saving. That said, you're going to want to compare like for like. So if you're looking at a grade 4 on the auction, but you've got a dealer here whose grade is unspecified, that could have been an R grade, so it's not going to be like for like. So you want to make sure that you get the auction sheet for that to compare what grade it was. The real hard part about importers is just finding a really reputable importer that you can really trust, that really knows what they're talking about. It took me a long time to find mine, and even then I can't actually recommend them. And they were again lovely and really also quite accommodating, which was why I went with them. So again, not unhappy, but I just can't quite recommend them either. So you'll have to do some research on this one. Unfortunately, I don't really have a framework for this. Some importers also won't deal with like much cheaper cars because it's too much effort for them or whatever it is. That said, whichever one you go with, I would recommend that you pick one that's an Australian company that's based in Australia. Just do your usual due diligence. How long have they been established for? You know, is there photos of their team or the members online? What informational materials are they giving you? Do they have an office, a track record, an ABN, an ACN? Are they registered with RAWs? All these sorts of stuff to build a bit of a profile. Unfortunately, even the importers don't know a lot about vans, so you're more than often gonna have to do all the heavy lifting for them. The first importer I contacted, I told them I want a super long wheelbase, 4x4, gave them the overview of everything I wanted, and they said, all right, what's the model number? And I said, I've got no idea, because it's really hard to find information on that. For example, I was looking at TRH229W, but there was also TRH229S. And I'm like, what's the difference? I don't know the difference, so how am I supposed to make a decision? I was really hoping that they would guide me through that because they have the contacts in Japan. A lot of them speak Japanese. I was hoping that they would be able to help me sort out these differences. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted, but I wasn't sure the differences in the model codes. But this particular importer was like, no, sorry, you just need to give us a code. So pretty much you are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and then they're just there to do the auction. So that was why I actually went with that importer that I did, because he was willing to take on questions and try and help me. Unfortunately, in the end, it turned out some of their answers were wrong, but I appreciated that they were at least really willing and keen to try and help me. In the very end, I actually ended up spending about 3 days translating all of the Hiace manuals from Japanese to English, and then creating my own database of all the model codes and the difference between each one. And just in case you don't know how importing through an importer works, here's a general overview. First, you pay them an importer fee anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Then they'll start looking for the van that you want. Again, you have to give them what van you want. They usually work through auctions, so when a van comes up that matches your description, they'll then tell you, and you have to give them a maximum bid price. That is the maximum amount that you're willing to pay for the van. If you lose the auction, this will continue until you win one. Once you win one, you pay for the van and you pay for it to be moved out of the auction house. Then you pay for all the little fees, decontamination, etc. Then you pay for the shipping, then you pay for GST in Australia, the port fees, compliance, etc. So the whole process process once you purchase the van takes probably about 2 months. But before the purchase of the van, you need to wait for it to come up in auction and then hope that you win the auction and keep bidding on vans until you do. So to be safe, I'd say you're looking at probably a minimum of 3 months. I mentioned compliance. This is a whole other bag of chips. I originally wanted to import my van entirely myself, but I knew nobody in Japan who could bid at the auction for me. So because of this, I had to spend a lot of time researching the process, and what I ended up finding out was it's all just a bunch of useless bureaucracy where they make you jump through hoops for absolutely no reason. So just know that the compliance process is a little bit janky and that they're currently importing under a SEVS rule, which means your van might be registered as a camper van even though it's given to you as an empty van. I do think if that became an issue in terms of insurance, then it would fall back on the rules workshop, but I'm not totally sure. So a couple of other popular questions that I see all the time, one of them is, can you stand up in it? Well, it depends how tall you are. I'd say anything over 164, you're gonna need to start bending your head. I can stand up in it, but I'm short. But what you need to understand is that the Hiaces, at least in Australia, only come in long wheelbase, which is a short roof, and super long wheelbase, which is a high roof. In Japan, there is one option, which is the X-Ambulance option, which come in like an ultra high roof. So you could look at that if that's what you really wanted and you wanted to import something. Other than that, you're looking at a vehicle that was fitted aftermarket, so the campers have like a fiberglass top put on them. Some people put pop tops on them, etc. I personally don't think it's a big issue. I've lived in the long wheelbase, which was too small for me. But if you get a seat, then you can just sit upright and do everything else that you can standing on a seat. Though, of course, it is really nice to be able to stand up and walk around fully. How well do they do off-road is another popular question. I can't attest to this personally because I've kind of babied mine and not taken it anywhere extreme. But I can say compared to my Aussie rear-wheel drive, it is night and day. That thing got stuck everywhere, going over like the side of the road, the lips on the side of the road. It got stuck on like flat, wet grass. I got like PTSD from trying to reverse park up a hill and the back wheels were just spinning. It wouldn't reverse up the hill. That said, it wasn't loaded, but yeah, this thing is so good. I reversed this one up a wet grassy slope and I thought surely she will slip at least a little bit. Nope, it was a breeze. Didn't break a sweat. So from that standpoint, I love these all-wheel drives and I think they're great for giving you just that little bit of extra peace of mind, but they're not comparable to a proper 4x4. You also have to consider if just upgrading your two-wheel drive Aussie one with some all-trains and a diff locker is going to do just as good of a job. Stock for stock, these things are awesome. I've seen them on sand. They're great. Which model should I get is another question. That one's just entirely up to you. If you need help deciphering model codes, hit me up. I can help you with that. Diesel, petrol, they have their pros and cons. If you're towing, maybe diesel. If you're worried about potential problems, maybe petrol. There's no need to get into that for this video. This is mainly about importing. So look, what would be really ideal is if Toyota took all the good things from the Japanese Hiace and put them into the Australian one, but let's face it, they only got barn doors like 2 years ago, so that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I'm selling mine purely because I have run out of money and I'm jobless at the moment, but I would happily buy another one, and I'm already thinking of like which one I would like to get if I did buy another one. Things are a bit more inconvenient. They do take a bit more effort, like even posting my ad on car sales. I had to email car sales and be like, you've posted the wrong model code, and they didn't have it in their Redbook system, so they had to add it to the Redbook system. Things are just a little bit more of a pain, insurance, parts, etc. But they're not major inconveniences, except cruise control. Damn, I missed that. I should have put that in first thing. But I love my van and they're becoming more popular. I'm seeing more and more of these on the roads. I'm seeing every man and his dog starting up an import business where they're importing Japanese Hiaces. So the more popular they become, presumably the easier all these things like parts, insurance, etc. will also be. I know I rambled on a bit. I always tend to ramble on. Hopefully this gives you a bit of insight into some things and it was helpful. And if you have any other questions, just hit me up.